Okay, so welcome everyone. We're still a few people to trickle in, but we'll go ahead. And I'd like to hand it over to Alex McIsaac for our initial welcome.
Hi everyone, welcome to the WFMC Canada or Montreal branches event featuring Corey Levine. She's prepared a special presentation for us on her experiences in Afghanistan, and I'm sure she'll provide a lot of insight on the topic to us. So, I'm the executive director of the World Federalist Movement Canada. The World Federalist Movement is a not-for-profit education and advocacy group. We promote various types of institutional reforms to international institutions to make them more democratic and effective. So if anyone is interested in joining our movement after this presentation or interested in participating in future events like this one, feel free to visit www.wfmcanada.org. I'll put that in the chat for you. And at this point, I'll just pass it over to Christine.
Okay, so welcome. I'm the Montreal coordinator of the Montreal branch of the World Federalist Movement Canada. And we organize this event. The different branches organize events, but we share them with all of us if we're lucky enough to have a Zoom event. So Corey Levine is a human rights and peace building expert, researcher and writer with a specialization in gender. She's spent more than 25 years working in conflict areas with NGOs, bilateral and multilateral organizations, including the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, various UN peacekeeping missions, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Amnesty International, and UN Women. She's been traveling to Afghanistan since March 2002, and we're very lucky. She's just returned from 5 days. She just returned 5 days ago from a brief assessment trip to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we're going to hear her latest updates. So I'd like to turn it over to Corey, but just to say that she has a short PowerPoint, but then she welcomes many questions. So don't hold back. You can either raise your hand or put questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll hopefully have a really good discussion going. So over to you, Corey.
Thank you so much, Christine, for your warm welcome, and to the World Federalists, Alex and Erica, for hosting this event. It's really great to be here. As Christine mentioned, I just got back a few days ago, so bear with me. I'm still getting over the 12-hour jet lag. As Christine mentioned, I do look forward to what I hope is an engaging discussion. But first, what I'll do is give you a very brief overview of my experiences in Afghanistan, set the stage of what went wrong. Then I'll talk about what my experience is on the ground now, and end with how Canada and the international community can support Afghanistan in its current situation. And then, as I mentioned, I really look forward to hearing both your comments and your questions after that. So, as Christine mentioned, I first went to Afghanistan 20 years ago in March of 2002. I was sent there by the former Canadian International Development Agency, which is now a part of Global Affairs Canada, to see how Canada could contribute to the peace building efforts that were underway in the country. And this was, just to give you the context, this was shortly after, about 6 months after 9/11. Since that first trip, I've spent about 5 years altogether working in Afghanistan at different times and for different organizations, including for the UN and Amnesty International. So here are a few of the images of Afghanistan that greeted me 20 years ago. Bear with me as I put the PowerPoint up on screen. I think I need to, first, yes, okay. I think I've got this figured out. more or less. Okay.
You're in the right place.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Okay, so this is what I saw 20 years ago, a country of extreme poverty and absolute destruction. And I don't know why this image has always appealed to me. It was just so striking as I was driving somewhere from Kabul to another part of the country. Every time I returned to Afghanistan, the changes that were taking place in the country became more and more noticeable, in large part thanks to the largesse of the international community and the assistance that we were providing to the country. It was particularly noticeable in terms of girls' education and women's rights. This is, you could see girls going to school in their white scarves and dark school uniforms, holding hands, skipping over puddles, laughing and playing. It was really a wonderful sight to see. And then you saw women beginning to participate in public life in all kinds of ways. Women engineers, women soldiers, some in burqas, some not in burqas. And then you could see Western influence come, the access to Western goods, huge houses being built everywhere. There was growth. There was, just changes from the sense of just an underdeveloped country, so hamstrung by war, to a sense that the country was really moving forward. But at the same time, after a couple of years, you also began to notice the backlash for these changes. So everywhere one went, you would see barbed wire or bomb blast walls, and there was security everywhere. This was security just to get into a grocery store where your bags would be checked, you would be checked, and there were armed men everywhere. So what happened in the intervening years? This is the $64 trillion question and counting. A lot of pundits have weighed in since Kabul fell on August 15th last year, a date that is seared into my memory as it is seared into every Afghan memory. All of these pundits have different answers, but here are the main reasons why I think Afghanistan fell apart. First of all, the international community got its intervention wrong. To quote the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, it wasn't that we employed the wrong strategy. The problem was there were too many strategies. And you could see this shift in strategy on the ground every couple of years. There was a new change. So first there was the war on terror, why the international community went into Afghanistan in the first place. But then once security in the country started to deteriorate, this was followed by a need to support Afghanistan as a bulwark against Western enemies, particularly China on the eastern side of the country and Iran on the western side, but also Russia, which still has an extensive influence in the region. Second, the international community tried to impose a mirror image of Western style democracy without understanding the context that they were working in. So let me illustrate with one example from the justice system. The bulk of donor spending on justice reform was focused on strengthening the formal judicial system, the courts, training for judges, lawyers, etc., ensuring the application of the rule of law. This sounds great on paper, However, it completely ignored the fact that 80% of Afghans use what is known as the informal justice system, which is based on customary laws and ancient tribal traditions. And this is used to settle family disputes and community grievances. So it didn't understand that they were building a system that basically very few people used. Third, our intervention was geared to an urban educated elite in a country where 70% of the population is rural, and only about 25% of females and 50% of males are literate. So as a result, billions of dollars were squandered on programs that more benefited the international community at the expense of Afghan needs. Last, but most critically important, was the corruption that was embedded in everyday life. So everything and everyone could be bought if the price was right. Your diploma from high school, or your civil service exam, a license plate for your taxi, papers to import the goods for your store. It didn't matter whether you had the qualifications or the right paperwork or not. Nothing in the country functioned without some form of graft. So in hindsight, it's not unexpected that the country fell to the Taliban. What was surprising to most people, including Afghans, is the speed with which it happened. Despite provinces falling like dominoes in the last few weeks, people in Kabul expected the central government to hold. As one woman told me, she was a member of parliament when she went to work on Sunday morning, August 15th. She was there and in her office seeing constituents. And by the afternoon, she had lost her job as an MP and was forced to go into hiding. So what does Afghanistan look like now? First, the country is facing a humanitarian catastrophe, and I cannot emphasize this enough. 10% of the country is displaced inside the country, and at least 1/3 of the country suffers from extreme malnutrition, and 97% are living below the poverty line. In Kabul, however, life as was before, it seems the same as it was before. So there's still hustle and bustle on the streets. Billboards are hawking products. People are selling their wares. People, they're going to work, sitting in parks, and eating at restaurants. Even the parliament looks exactly the same as it did 10 months ago. However, it no longer exists as an institution. But if you look a little closer, what you notice is the traffic is quite a bit lighter. So this time it took me a fraction of the time to go from one end of Kabul to the other, whereas it used to take an hour or more. This time it would take 20 minutes. Now that the streets are no longer clogged with expensive armored SUVs that were favored by the international community and the Kabul elite. What's also very apparent is the lack of females on the street. You no longer see the schoolgirls in their uniforms skipping down the street. It's probably, it's so shocking that to see just, life going around as normal, but 3/4 of it is men. It's all men sitting in the parks, hurrying to work, eating in restaurants. Most of the government offices are still there, but with the black and white Taliban flag flying above them. I don't know if you can see on the screen the white flag with black writing. That's the Taliban flag. The one exception to the ministries is the former Ministry of Women's Affairs, which has now been disbanded, and the building is now the Ministry of the Ministry for the Prevention of Vice and the Promotion of Virtue, which is this building here. You also see writing on the doors of homes to indicate that they have already been searched for weapons and anything else that the Taliban consider illegal. So when they come in and do a search in your home, they'll scroll through your phone, they'll look into your computer, they'll make sure that there are no books that they consider to be contraband, or music, or anything else that they think is, against the policies that they want to promote in the country. There are still the same police checkpoints, but again with the Taliban flag flying. But now they're manned by the Taliban, some of whom are dressed recognizably as Taliban fighters with the black turban and the traditional clothes. Others look like they are a recruitment poster for the US Army. So I was doing double takes all the time. I was thinking, okay, this is a Taliban fighter, yet he looks like he's a US Marine in his garb and in his weapons. So you can see very visually the Taliban, how they were able to take all of the military hardware and the software that was left behind by the international community. So it was a challenge to take pictures anywhere in Kabul for obvious reasons. So bear with me that I don't have any photos of these men looking like recruits for the US military. But I did manage to get a photo of a slogan that you see everywhere in Kabul. And that is this. And it says, with divine help, our nation defeated America. So myself, we were only stopped once by the Taliban. And that was because they finally noticed that after a few days of us driving around, that we all had our faces showing. This was in violation of a new law that was brought in a few weeks ago, dictating that women have to have their faces as well as their hair and their bodies fully covered. So we hadn't given it much thought. Some women were still walking around the streets with their faces uncovered until a soldier stopped us and yelled at the driver, threatening him with jail time, because it's the men who are responsible to ensure that the women are fully covered. So after this, we made sure to keep our masks on. This is how a lot of women now are out in the streets in Kabul with the full hijab covered, but with masks, and the masks ensure that you are in compliance with the new law. So we were joking about how the Taliban, are very thoughtful about the health and welfare of women and making sure that we are keeping ourselves safe from getting COVID. What was interesting about this, that we were stopped maybe 3-4 days there into our trip there, is that it really depends a lot on the individual in charge, the experience that you're going to have. everyone that I spoke to, from the UN to NGO workers to media, talked about this. So, for example, in a few areas of the country, girls are still able to go to school past grade 6. Some Taliban officials are even willing to meet with women. A friend of mine who works for the UN told me that she was able to meet regularly with the governor of one province, speaking directly to him and even discussing issues like girls' education and women's employment. But when she has meetings with the governor of Kabul province, he only acknowledges her male interpreter, and if she speaks, she has to talk to the chair leg where he is sitting in order not to offend him. So while she's extremely frustrated that she has to do this, she's also relieved that with the Taliban in charge, she now has access, or the UN now has access to places in the country that they haven't had access to for 15 years, which means that they can get humanitarian aid to people in desperate need. One man, an Afghan, told me about a meeting that he had arranged with the governor of a province in central Afghanistan to meet with female NGO workers, the few remaining women that were employed with NGOs because they were delivering aid to women-headed households, so that they were able to go out and interact with their beneficiaries. He was willing to hear the troubles that they were having in doing this, except that in the end, the meeting was canceled because the women were all too afraid to go meet with the governor. They were worried about the backlash that they would experience after the meeting from the Taliban. So this is the kind of situation that seems to exist everywhere. I met an Afghan American woman in Kabul who runs a shelter for abuse victims. She runs it very discreetly, I might add, because one of the first things that the Taliban did when they came to power was to close down all the shelters. But she gave me an example of how she manages to operate, in that sometimes the commander of her local police station actually brings her women to shelters, women who have been are being abused at home, and they're willing to work with her on a kind of unwritten don't ask, don't tell policy. But this is 6 months after she went through having the Taliban show up at her door always in the middle of the night to search the place, and always to hold her, to bring her in for questioning for hours at a time. But there seems to have been some unwritten rule that she can exist. She's the only shelter that is able to operate in the country rather openly. Those that I spoke with who deal with the Taliban on a regular basis all talked about an internal struggle that's going on within the organization. It's no longer the united movement it used to be when they were last in power 20 years ago. Afghanistan has modernized considerably since then, and some Taliban have modernized with it. But they also have ISIS to deal with, a group even more hardline and extreme. This has helped shift some Taliban thinking to a limited extent, but on the other hand, it's also pushed the Taliban back to the same kinds of extremes that we saw 20 years ago. But even with the flexibility that some Taliban are showing, it's still very clear that the more rigid ideology that we associate with the Taliban is still dominates the upper echelons. And that's why the most heartbreaking meetings that I had were with Afghan women, listening to their stories of how their lives were completely upended after August 15th last year. They lost their jobs, they lost their ability to go anywhere without a male relative to escort them, and they lost their ability to speak for themselves. They are feeling very disheartened, very fearful, and disappointed that the international community has not done more to support them. This was one of women protesters that I have been working with since the beginning, after they started being tear gassed and beaten and arrested. They started to find a way to protest in their homes, but still have their voices heard. So what can we do? Well, first, as Canadians, we can lobby our government to amend our anti-terrorism laws, or at least develop workarounds so that Canadian NGOs can deliver humanitarian assistance that Afghans desperately need. Canada is the only major donor not to have done this yet. It's both painful and shameful to witness how much Canada lags behind in this area. We can also lobby the government to implement all of the recommendations made by the All-Party Special Parliamentary Committee on Afghanistan. The committee just released their report about 10 days ago, and I would encourage you all of you to read it and to write to your MPs asking them to ensure that the recommendations are incorporated into our policies and moving forward with Afghanistan. We can work to keep Afghanistan in the public eye and on the government's radar, because let's face it, as I heard time and time again in Afghanistan, the situation was pretty dire after the fall of Kabul. It only got worse once the war in Ukraine began, and the few resources that they had, the majority, or I should say the external funding coming into the country, the majority of that then got diverted to Ukraine. We also need to remind our government about our much vaunted feminist foreign policy, which is supposed to guide Canada's international work. As World Federalists, you can advocate for the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Afghanistan, for his mandate to be renewed when it expires next year. And the same goes for the mandate of the UN Assistance Mission on Afghanistan. It's also up for renewal next year. These are yearly renewals. The UN is needed in Afghanistan now more than ever, not only for assistance, but also for accountability, because there is no one else that has the reach in the country anymore other than the UN, and can hold the Taliban accountable for the violations that are taking place outside of the scrutiny of the international community. As well, there are many things the Taliban want from the international community. The top of that list are things like legitimacy, respect, and status. As you can see from this sign, which is the first thing that greets you upon entering into the airport in Kabul. It's no longer called the Hamid Karzai International Airport. It's called the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan Airport, and this is what greets you. They are also looking for financial assistance, considering that 75% of the budget of the previous government came from external funding, as well as the removal of sanctions. So as long as there are things that the Taliban want, this means that there is leverage. Donor countries need to agree on a roadmap for dealing with the Taliban. There needs to be a more unified multilateral effort to engaging with them, with the number one priority being the rights of women and girls. Thus far, efforts have been piecemeal. So for example, there are 5 other countries that also have feminist foreign policies: France, Germany, Mexico, Norway, and Sweden. All of these countries, except for Mexico, have been major donors to Afghanistan for the past 20 years. So this is an opportunity for these countries to lead the way, putting their money where their mouths are, so to speak. Afghan lives depend on this. So I think what I'll do is I will leave it there, and I look forward to your questions and your comments. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just trying that.
Hi, Corey. My question was about when you said that the Canadians weren't were the only people who weren't donors. I missed what banner it was under, but you were critiquing Canada for being very late to the table to work as a donor. Were you? Is that how it was described? But what I didn't understand is, why is Canada hanging back, do you think?
So the issue is Canada's anti-terrorism laws, which were put in place after 9/11. Because the Taliban is still listed as a terrorist organization, this does not allow any money to come directly into the country, because some of it will certainly end up in the hands of the Taliban. Other countries have developed workarounds, their own anti-terrorism laws, like signing bilateral agreements with organizations, exempting them from these laws, or reforming the laws completely. This was addressed fairly critically during the hearings that the Special Parliamentary Committee on Afghanistan had. The government's very well aware. There have been submissions, legal briefs made of how these laws can be reformed or addressed, citing the examples of Australia, UK, the US, but Canada's still very resistant. And nobody seems to know why. So I would suggest writing to your NP and seeing if you can get any answers as to why there is such a resistance to this. So thanks very much for that question. I'm just looking at the chat. Yes, okay. I will send links to petitions and information resources regarding the renewals of mandates, so you can put that up on your website. What is the relationship of the Taliban with ISIS? It is very challenging. They despise each other. They both view each other as perversions of Islam, frankly. now that the Taliban are in power, they have to worry about, you know, the majority of the attacks on government, but not only government, just on civilians that they used to do, are coming from ISIS. So it's a real problem. The Taliban have, I wouldn't say, as I said, people were worried about me when I went to Afghanistan, and I kept telling everyone, you didn't need to worry about me, because those that were trying to harm me before are now in power. ISIS seems to be focused on not only hitting the Taliban where it hurts, but also attacking those that they think are apostates to Islam. So they're the ones that are attacking Hazaras. There was a Shia, Hazaras, Shia mosques have been bombed. There was an attack a couple of days ago on a Hindu temple. You know, most of the most Hindus and Sikhs have long left the country. It was too dangerous for them to be there, but you know, the few that are remaining, they are being targeted, and this is the work of ISIS, where it used to be the work of the Taliban. Yes, the Special Commons report. Okay, July 8th. Thank you, Eileen Oleksiak, for that information. I have not seen any government reaction to it. It would be interesting to see. Again, I would encourage you to write to your MPs asking for the implementation of the committee's recommendations.
We have a couple of hands up.
Okay, sorry, please go ahead. I don't see the hands. Yes.
Okay, Ajmal, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Cody, for the brief information. My name is Ajmal Ramier. I'm recently moved to Canada. I'm leading the organization called Afghans for Progressive Thinking Organization in Afghanistan. Since my arrival in Canada, we were working with university students in Afghanistan since 2011. We have our members in Afghanistan, and since I arrived, so we helped some of our members because we were working with different organizations, including some Canadian organizations inside Afghanistan. So some of my colleagues had the chance to get out of Afghanistan, but unfortunately, most of them are still stuck in Afghanistan, and some of them who are the #1 target for the Taliban, who are from minorities, Hazaras, they are still stuck in Pakistan. I don't know if you have some information, or if anyone in the groups have some information regarding some private sponsorship. Now I'm working with Samaritan Press Canada, so they are trying to find some sponsors to help out these families who are stuck in Pakistan, even though I know most of them when the situation gets worse. So I'm out from Kabul, so on 24th of August. So I know for the whole situation that what's going on, and we have ongoing. We have members in 34 provinces of Afghanistan. Still, they are trying to operate, and somehow they know that they could not continue their activities as the past, but they are still trying to somehow protect their human basic rights. So some of my members that I know, some of the families who are mostly Hazaras, they are in Pakistan, even though some of them, they do not have passport. They left Afghanistan after the collapse, even though in August, and even though they cannot go back to Afghanistan. So if anyone wanted, so we have a list, a number of 30 to 40 especially most of them are women, so they have lifted some of their family members are in Afghanistan, some of them are in Pakistan, and they are seeking some support to find some ways to get to somewhere safe. And also some of them are like, they are coming under the category of the sponsorship for the Canadians, like minorities. There are minorities, some of them are women activists. So if anyone have some information, maybe I can put our website in the chat and in the email, so they can reach out to me. And also we have currently some of our activities we are ongoing with some university students. So this is also some ways of that we wanted to maintain this connection that we had with different universities inside Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Hi, Tashakkur, Ajmal. Salam alaikum. Very glad to see you here. This is wonderful. Mubarak, I'm glad that you're here and in safety. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. It is, you've touched on so many different issues, but the number one thing is that so many Afghans at risk are still stuck in Afghanistan. Those who've managed to make it to Pakistan are only slightly less at risk. It should be noted, the Pakistani government has done everything in its power to try and stem the tide of Afghans coming into Afghanistan. Along to the extent that, for example, landlords can be jailed for renting to Afghans who are not in Pakistan legally. Afghans are picked up and repatriated all the time. Yeah, and the Taliban is very active in Pakistan as well. Which leads me, somebody put in the chat about Pakistan having any influence with the Taliban, and I can speak to that for a minute, but I just want to say, Ajmal, there are so many different challenges with private sponsorship. As you know, one is the lack of spaces. One is the incredible cost it takes to bringing, in order to bring an Afghan family to Canada and sponsor them for a year, which is what the government requirement is. There's, a lot of paperwork, as those who, I know a few of you on the call are kindly and wonderfully support, working in sponsorship groups to bring Afghans at risk to Canada. It's wonderful. The other problem is that you need to be out of Afghanistan in order to be sponsored. This is dictated by actually international law. There are ways of working around it that Canada hasn't yet addressed. So there are a lot of obstacles to private sponsorship, and the report from the special committee addresses a few of these. So again, encouraging you to connect with your members of parliament, with the government, to ensure that all the recommendations are implemented in the report. And again, many thanks, Ajmal, for sharing, and I'm glad to see that you've put the website up there, and I'm happy to stay in touch with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
With regard to the influence of Pakistan, Pakistan is going through its own incredible challenges at the moment. Many of you probably know that the government was recently overthrown, and there's a new government in power that it's hard to know how friendly or not officially that they are with the Taliban. But let's face it, the Taliban were originally developed with the support of the Afghan Secret Service, the ISI, and I forget, the jet lag is starting to kick in. I forget what the ISI stands for, but you know, the Pakistani equivalent of the CIA or CSIS, what have you. And they are probably the most powerful institution in Pakistan, and they will continue to always support the Taliban, despite what the politicians may want. And at the moment, Pakistan is really politically teetering on the edge, which leaves, basically the Taliban more or less intact as the politicians try and sort out the political mess there. So the Pakistani government, either this current one or the previous one, have shown very little interest in reining in the Taliban. There has, thank you, Alex, Intersecurity Intelligence, ISI. Okay, thanks, Google. So the, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Okay, so there is a Pakistani Taliban that has had skirmishes with the Afghan Taliban, but still, they are the Taliban. They are influential in Pakistan, and they will continue for the foreseeable future to provide support to the Taliban in Afghanistan. I don't see that changing. Okay, what the UN is doing on the ground in Afghanistan. Yes, they are absolutely addressing hunger and other basic survival issues. The World Food Program is running a massive program to try and feed people. The problem is funding. The world attention is like a tsetse fly, and when the international community fled in August, much of the money fled with it. Some money has come back into the country, but Afghans and internationals alike told me how devastating Ukraine has, the impact that the Ukrainian war has been on them. Just more attention is being paid to the crisis in Ukraine. It's also an incredible humanitarian crisis that's happening in Ukraine with no sign of abating. So yeah, it's a matter of a lack of funding and the resources to go with providing to go into providing support for life-saving programs. Why UNHCR in Pakistan is not functioning? That's a good question. I mean, I've been told a variety of different reasons why it isn't. One of the reasons is that the international community, those countries that take in refugees, lost interest in helping Afghan refugees. Their attention's moved elsewhere in the world. So when there is no durable solution, the UNHCR, doesn't operate. They put in resources where they can find durable solutions for refugees, for those countries who want to take in refugees, among them Canada, and then countries prioritize refugees from which countries that they will take in. So there was a waning interest in taking in refugees in Pakistan from Afghanistan. So UNHCR more or less folded up operations. Why they haven't come back in? They claim that they are scaling up, but there's no sign of it. In fact, they seem to be scaling back even more so. I think that's the complex question, and it has to do with, relationships with the host country. I don't think Pakistan is, I think the more support is offered to Afghan refugees, the more that they worry that more Afghans will come into Pakistan. But it's a question that nobody really seems to have an answer to. Saudi Arabia and many other Western Asian countries are becoming more liberal. Is this apparent in Afghanistan? Absolutely not, at least not at the moment. Will it have any effect? It doesn't seem to. Saudi Arabia, other very conservative Muslim countries have all come out with official statements on the Taliban ban on education for girls past grade 6. It hasn't seemed to have made any dent in official policy. So yeah, I'm not very hopeful at the moment. They haven't, Saudi Arabia and other countries have not spoken out about the fact that women have been pushed out of public space, have lost their jobs, and have been effectively put back into purdah, are locked in homes. So, education is the issue that the international community seems to be absolutely in sync with, but other apartheid type policies affecting women and girls, there's not a lot of consensus there. I'm wondering, have I
Okay, there was a question for,
okay.
sorry, there was a question further up about the 30 Birds Foundation and women, if there was why is it taking so long to bring women and girls into Canada if they've already been accepted? What's the delays about? So that's further.
Well, yes, Canadian bureaucracy is at its finest. Afghanistan, yeah, I have seen nothing but delays and obstacles since Kabul fell last year. I don't know the 30 Birds Foundation. There's hundreds of organizations that are working to try and get Afghans out of Afghanistan and to Canada or other Western countries. I should say, though, that Canada has been more generous than other Western countries in terms of the numbers of Afghans that they have accepted per capita. Other Western countries do not have the same range of programs to bring Afghans to their countries. So I do applaud Canada for that. However, they have made it as difficult as possible to implement their own policies. Why? I really don't know. And after 6 months of talking to the government, I still don't know why that is and why everything takes so long. So again, I would encourage you to write to your MP and ask why.
We have a hand up from Fran Harding.
Okay. Hi, Fran.
Go ahead and unmute, Fran.
Corey, I'm interested in the status of UNAMA.
Mhm.
They recently reaffirmed its mandate.
Yeah.
And now they're letting their current head come home, I assume, or go somewhere. Have you any feeling at all about the ability of UNAMA representatives to deal with the Taliban, to negotiate with them on behalf of other countries? And have you any evidence of any success to date?
Great question, Fran. So UNAMA, for those who may not be familiar, stands for the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. And for those family and friends that are on this Zoom, this was the organization that I spent many years in Afghanistan working for. UNAMA's mandate is a yearly mandate, so it will come up for renewal once a year. There was a great deal of concern in March when its renewal came up that they would change the nature of the mandate. Luckily, that has not happened, but it definitely behooves keeping a close eye on it to ensure that the mandate does not change. Second, Deborah Lyons, a Canadian, originally from New Brunswick, my home province, was the head of UNAMA in Afghanistan. She was there for 2 years. She was there at an extremely difficult time. And it wasn't that they didn't renew her contract. I suspect that she needed a change. However, she has stated that she does plan on coming back to Afghanistan. In what capacity, nobody knows. It will be very interesting to see who is the new appointee as the UN representative in Afghanistan. All that to say, UNAMA, as do all UN representatives in Afghanistan, are engaging very actively with the Taliban pretty much on a daily basis. They are now the de facto government, and the UN works on a government to government basis. So there is constant engagement with them. But what I found, or what I heard from everyone, it really depended on who you dealt with. There were some Taliban that are more open, that are more flexible, that are more willing to engage with the UN, that recognize the value that the UN contributes to Afghanistan. I think all the Taliban do, but some are more willing to, within their rigid ideology, find some grounds for negotiation and compromise. All the UN that I talked to all talked about trying to find this tiny little bit of space with the Taliban and figure out programming, how to work from there. So I think the success depends, it will be very incremental. it will be very slow. And again, it seems to depend on the the individual authority, the governors of the provincial governors, the district governors, but certainly the Taliban and the national level administration are wanting the recognition, wanting the financial assistance, but not willing to compromise on their ideology in order to gain it. So, yeah, I think as someone said, it's one step forward, 10 steps back, but the discussions, negotiation, and engagement is ongoing for sure.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, can girls take online courses? Absolutely. So please, if you find any online courses, let me know and I will forward them to every girl I know. Will the international community finally learn that going into conflict areas such as Afghanistan, imposing our Western systems of judicial, social, and ethical reconciliation does not succeed? It reminds me of Canada's efforts to impose Western approaches on the Aboriginal communities for these many decades. Thanks, Patricia, for that comment. I think that's an open-ended discussion. I personally don't really see any changes. I've seen a lot of talk over the 25 years that I've been doing human rights in war zones, and some attempt at change, at not imposing our own Western values on these countries where we're engaged in. But no, I haven't really seen that much of a difference. But you know, that's my own personal opinion, and I'm sure that people on this call will have a variety of opinions with regard to that. So I'd be happy for another discussion just on that topic alone. That would be a very interesting one. I don't know if anyone has any comments on that question or comment.
If I may,
Yes.
Laura Liebig, I worked as a governance specialist at CEDA, not specifically on Afghanistan, but I was involved with one project under IDLO, the International Development Law Organization, and they were working on traditional and customary law in Afghanistan. And that was definitely the way to go. And I don't know why it wasn't picked up to a greater extent, both by Canada and other foreign donors.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, there were some wonderful projects that I saw on the ground in Afghanistan, and wonderful projects that I've seen in other conflict countries, but they tend to be piecemeal. We don't necessarily learn from our mistakes, but I guess that's a very human thing.
It would take a realignment of thinking, a paradigm shift. Yeah.
Right. That's exactly it. And so far haven't seen that. But that actually reminds me, I saw a question way back up there that I forgot to answer. Why is it so difficult? I think somebody asked about the difficulty of getting Afghans who worked for and with Canada out of the country. I agree, they are in absolute grave danger. You know, I am so perplexed about this, and I know that there are some people on this call who are themselves had worked closely with Afghans in Afghanistan in official capacities and have not been able to get them out. I was chatting with the man who was headed up the law firm that the Canadian embassy used for years. They were Canada's lawyers, and most of them can't get out of Afghanistan. I have no idea why. I have also, I know people still stuck in Afghanistan who worked on CETA-funded projects. And the government is very well aware of all of these people. Why they have done nothing to help get them out of the country is beyond me. No one seems to have an answer to this, and it really is appalling. Again, encouraging you all to write to the government to demand that they take action in this area. Okay, just scrolling through the chat. How available is the internet? So that, I think, is very dependent on where you are, whether you have access to electricity. Often the electricity is out. The Taliban have very little funding to keep the lights on, so to speak. And it's also very expensive too. So definitely people do have access to the internet, but it's not uniform and across the country or within different socioeconomic communities. But I love the idea about, providing online courses designed for Afghans that can be accessed over there. That's just a fabulous idea. And I hope that some organization in Canada picks up on that. I would certainly champion it. If ISIS can be separated from the Taliban, could Afghanistan funds frozen to award 9/11 victims be freed? That would be a question for an American, because I honestly don't know, but President Biden was very clear that Afghanistan was not a conflict that he was ever in favor of having the US there, and we can see it from the awful exit at the end of August last year. The fact that the Taliban remains a terrorist organization in all Western country lists, I don't think will make a difference to the US, but that's something that would be, that can be answered by an American. I'm sorry, I don't know. The Chief Commissioner from Canada have any influence? I'm sorry, I'm not sure who you mean by the Chief Commissioner. Patricia Houston, can you clarify your question, please? Okay. All right, well, we're waiting for Patricia if I'm not sure if she's still on the line. The late Flora McDonald's project to build and support for Afghan girls still in place. I highly doubt it. There are absolutely no projects that were taking place before the fall of the government last year that are still ongoing, except for humanitarian projects. Fergus, a quick factual question. Was the parliamentary committee report unanimous? Supported by all parties. Well, it was supported, as far as I'm aware. The breakdown of the members of the committee followed, you know, represented the percentage of seats of the parties in Parliament, and certainly the committee in its bipartisanship was hopeful that this would be something that the Liberal government would take on. How the government has responded, I don't know. Having been out of the country, I was not, I did not see the media around the release of the report. So maybe somebody who's been following that knows better than I do. If anyone has a comment on that.
It will be available online, or is already online under the committees.
Yeah.
And if you want to read any particular briefs or sections, it will be there.
Yeah, it's already online. You can read it. That's not the problem. I think the problem was just wondering about whether it's been supported by all parties. I know that it's well, it was supported by the Bloc and the NDP. How the Liberals and the Conservatives have supported it, I'm not aware. If anybody is aware, please, please speak up. Okay, something to.
That message from Blair is continued further on. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, the Conservative and NDP members registered their views at the end of the report. Okay. I've only just taken a brief look at the recommendations and did not see the registering of views at the end of the report. Thanks for that, Eileen. Okay, a question. So it's actually not the High Commission in Islamabad's decision to admit 40,000. That's the government of Canada. So the High Commission only works, it's the embassy. So they work with IRCC, the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, and Global Affairs Canada, regarding the entry of the 40,000 promised Afghans. So the High Commission in Islamabad only deals with those Afghans who have been given visas in Pakistan, and they are just acting in accordance with government policy, and it's in Canada are the ones, the officials in Canada are the ones to decide who will get visas and who doesn't. Blair Brook, Traditional Law versus Formal Judicial Law, a recommended book by Mohammed Sessi, Domination Through Law, Discussion, Situation in Post-Conflict Sierra Leone and Liberia. Thank you very much for that recommendation. That's much appreciated. Okay. Have I missed any questions or comments or hands?
Oh, there's Ajmal has his hand up again. And I think we just missed, not missed, but somebody asked what capacity you were in when you in your last visit to the one you just returned from, or was it like a personal visit? Or
Well, I've been working individually and with many other organizations since the fall of Kabul to support Afghans at risk in Afghanistan and those who have left. And so I went with some colleagues from other organizations to do an assessment of what is the situation on the ground there now. We've all been supporting, for example, safe housing, and just to get a better situation of the challenges and difficulties that Afghans at risk are facing in the country. So it was, I guess, a consortium of individuals and organizations that went together. And our focus was on primarily on Afghan women who have been, who are at risk because of their the work that they did in the prior government, like Afghan women MPs, and also women who have been protesting since the Taliban came to power. Okay, how individuals can help with this initiative? Yes, with a special with the initiative that I'm talking about. Well, what I can do is put together a list of organizations that are working with Afghans at risk. A lot of us are just individuals, but there are some organizations, and I can put this list together, and maybe the World Feds can send it out in their newsletter or to the registrants on this call. And certainly one of them is Ajmal's organization, and he did put that in the chat somewhere. www.aptyouth.org.
Ajmal, do you have another question or a comment? We have a few minutes left, so.
Yeah, sorry, just a short comment on regarding the 40,000 Afghans who Canada announced for their evacuation from Afghanistan. One thing that we experienced for most of those Afghans who are in Afghanistan and they work for the Canadian government after the September, the process just got stopped, and most of these Afghans, those who are ending up in Islamabad, so they are being evacuating in this numbers. But also I have some newses from that some US organizations are referring some Afghans who are in Germany, who are in Albania, who are in Abu Dhabi. They're referring those Afghans to the government of Canada, to IRCC. So these are affecting those Afghans who directly or indirectly work for the Canadian government and those who are in Afghanistan. And somehow the process for those who are out of Afghanistan and have worked for the Canadian embassy, or like it's somehow fast than those who are in Afghanistan. I know many people who couldn't get the chance to get to the Kabul airport on the from 15th of August to 13th of August. Those are all stuck, and there is no communication after 13th of August with them from IRCC. So that was all.
Okay. Okay, I think that was, as far as I know, the last of the questions. There was one long one from Katira, who was studying in the library, but I've saved the chat, Corey, and I'll make sure you get that information that she wanted to share with you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Corey for a fascinating talk and show about it just back from Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's just amazing information, and we wish that the people there can work together and develop again back where they were before, and maybe even better this time. And that we really hope that the Canadians can help with the people that they're trying to get out, and work with the United Nations to make sure everyone gets fed there, and just really hope that they don't give up a spirit. Sometimes I guess if they have an oppressive government, it's probably very depressing, but I'm hoping that the people will survive and continue working towards a better world. I'd like to thank you from the World Federalists from Montreal, and thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you so much for having me. And it was really wonderful to be here. My apologies as my jet lag started to kick in. So please forgive me for that. But thanks to everyone who asked some great questions and had some wonderful comments. Yeah, I really appreciated everyone's input. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks very much, Corey. And thank you everybody who's come and joined us. And we hope to see you at events starting in September. Okay. All right. So